I'm Sarah Hodges, and this is Executives Uncut, the podcast where we provide solutions for the corporate cycle of hell. Now, today we're talking all about micromanaging, and I'm here again with Fergus Connolly, performance coach, author, and TED Talk speaker, as part of our Concept of Chaos series. Hey, Fergus.
Sarah, nice to be back.
Yeah, it's so great to see you have a different background. You have all sorts of cool sports tchotchkes going on back there. Any particular ones you want to show us? Got
Oh
your
no,
book?
not really. These are things that actually I uncovered in a box. I
Oh,
usually take,
really?
I usually take them and put them away, or I send them home to my parents. Someday I'll look at them. These ones I uncovered in a box. So nice reminders, nice memories.
I love it. I love having just kind of little reminders. I have like this little troll from when I was 10 years old that I like to hang out. There's nothing special about it. I just think that it's cute, and I've just kept a hold of it all these years. And so it's like on a little shelf in my closet. It's nice to have little tchotchkes around. Little
Yeah, and
knickknacks.
there's one or two I can't find actually.
Oh,
There was one
really?
there was one not to go off topic. There was one I met Kevin Plank. He was the CEO of Under Armour at the time, and I remember meeting him after a game. We were talking, and I admired his Under Armour pin. And this is a CEO of a multi-million dollar company at the time, probably $1 billion company, but he just took the pin off, gave it to me, and because they'd only got them made, and it was kind of cool. So I have it somewhere. I know I still have it, and I need to find it.
Oh, that's cool. Take a picture of it and send it to me when you find it.
Yeah, I just thought it was I thought it was pretty impressive. The CEO would give it to a nobody at the time, just
Yeah,
there and
just took
then.
it off his
Yeah,
shirt.
yeah.
That's so cool. I love it. Well, speaking of giving things to people, let's talk about giving tasks to employees and then letting them take it and not doing it yourself. So today is all about micromanagement. Where have you seen micromanagement show up in sports?
Oh, you see it all the time. Actually, you see it a lot with coaches who, because you've got such a huge staff, very similar to business, and you've got so many people that you see coaches trying to micromanage every single coach and player,
Mm.
even on game day in particular. But then I've
Oh,
seen some really good examples of how not to micromanage, and I'm just thinking back. Actually, I remember being at the Patriots and watching Bill Belichick, and he was a master of uh, that balance between micromanaging and taking a step back, and it really struck me. And it's the same in business. Like I mean, we were talking earlier. I'm sure you've got stories as well of helping people and managers, directors understand how to maintain that balance between getting too involved and just keeping that healthy balance between directing and
yeah.
micromanaging.
Yeah, where do you think micromanaging comes from? Like what drives a leader to micromanage?
Well, so one of the biggest challenges I think you've got in the corporate world and in the sports world in general is that as people come through, move up each stage, leadership and management aren't skills that they are taught. So the skill set they used initially, doing the task, getting the task done, and as they elevated or moved up and became a manager, became a director, they resort back to what they did, which was to get the task done, rather than developing their leadership management skills. You see it in sport, you see it in business, and it's again, as a coach, I think that's one of the areas that you can help people the most, in helping them understand that it's in your best interest to help develop those who work not for you but with you, so that in the long run, they develop and you actually get better and more work done.
I definitely see that on my end too. But it's interesting to hear your perspective, especially through the lens of sports, right? What do you think are the major drawbacks of micromanagement?
I think there are so many, but in the long run, I end up seeing, managers. I only had this was it last week? You know, this particular person was just getting so exhausted doing tasks for someone, and it actually started. It didn't start as a micromanaging issue. It started as an issue that they were having trouble with someone who wasn't completing a task to the standard that they were required. This was becoming a habit, and basically presenting the issue wasn't necessarily the employee. The issue was the director. They hadn't allowed, permitted, or encouraged this person to reach a standard. And because they had been micromanaging, because they had essentially been enabling poor behavior, that was an interesting realization for the director at the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. It can happen kind of even in mid-level management, right? Or director level positions or upper level management. If they have not been led appropriately by their management, and that trickles down.
Yeah, and I think particularly now when you've got so much chaos and uncertainty, the ability of your staff to adapt and to change and to be able to encourage that in them, that's really, really important. More so now because so many companies are working remote. It's far more important now, and actually, some people who haven't developed it and their staff are struggling or trying to play catch up at the minute.
Absolutely. And, I think that, from my end, what I see most often is that micromanagement just leads to low engagement. It leads to low morale because the employees can't take ownership of their tasks. They can't put their passion and their creativity and their stamp on it because their leader is always kind of getting in the way of it and retaining ownership for themselves. So what do you think prevents a leader from giving that ownership fully to the staff member?
Well, yeah, and actually, just on that point, when you get to the stage of low morale or apathy or disengagement, it's too late if you haven't spotted it by then, and that's a dangerous point. But it often comes about through insecurity, but not recognizing in the long run the benefit of just being careful that you're not micromanaging your employee, and also I think a lot of it is having clear pathways and development pathways for your staff. Recognizing where and why these issues are arising. Because if you have that in place and you've taken that time to really focus on the development of the staff, it doesn't arise. It doesn't arise in the same way. But if you reach the point of apathy, yeah, you've definitely missed a few other red flags before then.
Yeah, and I think at least in a one-on-one coaching setting from my end, I don't think it's always intentional. These leaders were usually promoted to a management position, like you were saying earlier, because they did their task well, and they only know how to quantify their value to their company or a job well done by doing tasks well. And so it's almost like many of these managers never shifted how they quantify their value. It's no longer about how well they're doing their tasks, but how well their staff is completing their tasks. How engaged their staff is, how great the culture is there. Right? There's so much more involved in a manager than there is in just a staff member who's executing a task, because it's also about influence. It's also about drawing people in and getting them happy to be at work. When you have everyone happy to be at work, they're engaging in their tasks even more, and then the entire corporation rises. But without that training, like you were saying earlier, it's easy for leaders to just continue to want to do the same tasks over and over again, or say, oh, well, if my staff doesn't fulfill their task, then it falls back on me. And then there's that fear there, right? Of then, oh, if it falls back on me and they don't get it done, then leadership is going to come down on me, right? So like, it's just this cycle that perpetuates in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, I made this mistake myself as well, particularly when in different management or leadership roles, I'm working late into night in a project that I'd assigned to someone else. They hadn't done to my standard. It wasn't good enough. And it slowly dawned on me, hang on, there's something wrong here. If you're not developing your staff and you're not helping your staff fulfill these pretty basic tasks, like, why is that? Is it that you've been micromanaging? Is it that you've not been allowing them? And it took me a while to realize it. But the benefit of it then, when I did understand what I was doing wrong, to me, was the surprising inspiration, ideas that they came with that I would never have done. And that was very, very beneficial. So it wasn't even just getting the task completed. It was recognizing that many of the people that are working for me were, when they were engaged, were coming to me with far greater ideas than I could. They were actually making me look a lot better because of that. But it
Yes.
took me a while to realize that. I was a little bit of a slow learner at the time.
Yeah, yeah, I totally am with you. I mean, even just asking, I ask Justin and Emily, our interns, all the time, like, how would you make this better? And they always make it better. Like, they are very creative, wonderful, amazing individuals to work with. And if I just did everything myself and didn't ask them, I wouldn't get the benefit, which helps this company rise in general, right? So I totally hear you. And yet, I do think that, there are situations in which, as a leader, you sometimes have to do something yourself. If there's a crisis situation, if there's a deadline and there's no way that it's just not even fair to ask, certain staff members to, stop everything that they're doing to help out. You can ask them, but also respecting the word no if they just can't do it. There are times, but in general, then it's like, okay, learn from that experience and make sure that these new skills are taught to them. Take the time to teach them before the next time that a deadline like that hits, right?
Yeah, and in those instances, help them do the task with you, not do it for them,
Yeah,
because then
that's a
you're
good
missing
point.
a wonderful opportunity for instruction and also teamwork. One final sports, I always remember this when I was at the 49ers. I remember some of the older players. I was asking them what was Bill Walsh like, and they all told me a really interesting story. So in practice, if a player made a mistake, he as the head coach wouldn't criticize the player. He would always criticize that player's coach. Now,
Mm.
it would have been easier for him to go into micromanage and to actually solve the problem with the player, but he chose, rather than do that, take a step back and coach the coach. And that was a really, really interesting. I can to go on and win Super Bowls, but that was something I hadn't heard before. And it made me think really about the skill of management, because our instinct is to go and fix it and do it ourselves.
Mhm.
But we can empower people, we can help people, and then they in turn develop those leadership skills, which again help us. So sometimes just taking that moment and taking that time rather than rushing in the long run,
Mhm.
helps us and our staff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it makes me think, sometimes something that I saw just recently with a client is this particular leader, they didn't want to delegate because they didn't want to appear lazy in front of their staff. They didn't want to appear like they weren't a team player and they were just making everybody else do their responsibilities. And so I think it's important to know that sometimes micromanaging or doing everything yourself or not delegating can come from a good place. And it's recognizing, like you said, the drawbacks in the long run of you're not giving your staff opportunities for engagement, for learning, for owning, that task. And so, one thing that we were talking about earlier that can help is just asking them, who's interested in taking on a new project, who's interested in learning something new.
Yeah, and one of the terms I use quite a bit now is, rather than director or manager, it's facilitator. So if you view it more as a
Yeah.
facilitation, you're a performance facilitator, you're a department facilitator. You see your role. You actually invert this so-called hierarchy. So your job is actually to serve people in terms of helping them do their job better for you. So that's where that feedback loop comes back around. But sometimes the term director and manager,
Mm-hmm.
means that we have to have our finger in the pie. Whereas really, as a facilitator, your job is to help facilitate those people doing their job better.
Oh man, that's genius. Just that shift of language, because then it's not about directives, right? It's about, kind of coordinating and inviting and getting everyone to play in the sandbox together, make something really cool.
We're all playing sandbox well together. Yes.
Yeah, that's really kind of the goal of any organization, right? Let's make something really cool and all play in the sandbox together and get along.
Yeah, and as we spoke about at the very beginning, the risks of micromanaging are infinite, and the biggest problem that you may see is, apart from the eventual apathy, are that because you're the person instigating and coming forward and micromanaging, it just becomes a one-way street, and you're not getting any feedback from your employees and from those people who are maybe at the cold face. That's a bigger problem.
Yeah, and listen, like I get it, right? Like Justin's listening. I'm going to talk about him for a second. I hope that's okay. Justin has a different way of operating than me, right? So he in order to have eustress, so the right amount of stress to propel him forward, he waits a little later to get something done than I do. And sometimes the night before something needs to get done, I'm like, okay, should I jump in and do it? Should I? And I know by now that he's always going to get it done. Like he's never not gotten it done, right? So we've developed trust. But at first, it was challenging, and it would have been really easy for me to just go in and do it myself. And one thing that's been really helpful is to ask, to just say, hey, any support that you need here, or how can I support you, or are there any resources you need that we haven't provided for you, that sort of thing. So if you want to jump in and you're a little bit nervous that somebody's not on top of something, it's totally okay to check in, but ask a question, like ask for consent. Do you need me to jump in here? How can I support you? So it's not like a pressure thing, like this is going to get done, right? And then doing it yourself.
Yeah, I have a really simple text message. I just send we cool and a question mark, and that's it. That's
awesome.
all. I don't want to impose. I don't ask too many detailed questions. I just want to know, are they cool? Have they got any questions? I just said we cool, and the reply is usually like an ice cube. Yeah, we're cool. Because
that is awesome.
Because if you're getting these
leveled up.
Yeah, well, if you're getting these, if you're working on something and you're under pressure and getting all these questions from someone, hey, just give me a minute, I've got this. So yeah, we could, and that's what works. It might not work for everybody, but it tends to work.
That is awesome. So we cool. So the way to prevent micromanaging is, instead of getting involved, just send them a text message that says we cool. That's the takeaway from today.
Yeah, and when you use the term "we" as well, you're there to support someone as opposed to "you cool," and it's not accusatory. It's just, that's how I've adapted.
That's awesome. I love it. That's so I feel like it's also like a male versus female, and maybe not. But I'm like, are you anything that you need? How can I support you? And you're like, we cool.
we got to come up with a more gender-friendly one, but yeah.
I love it. Should we get some tips? I feel like that's the perfect segue.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So first thing is just some self-awareness. Just pay attention, maybe take a little inventory, and notice when you're doing something that can be done by a staff member. If you think it can be done by a staff member, you might be, refusing to delegate or micromanaging. Tip number 2, give your staff an opportunity to accomplish a task in their own way. It doesn't necessarily, you may have a standard operating procedure, but for most things, it doesn't have to be done exactly the way that you wanted it to be done. And 3, ask your staff how you can support them before going in and fixing. And you can say, how can I support you? Or you can say, we cool. Anything else you want to add to those tips, Fergus?
You nailed it, sir.
Awesome. So for our coaching challenge this week, at your next meeting, ask your staff, who would like to learn a new skill and who has the capacity to take it on? If you just ask them that simple thing, okay, who wants to learn something new and who actually has the capacity to do it, you are going to have volunteers. And that makes delegating much easier. And when somebody volunteers to do it and they also have the capacity to take it on and they take ownership of it, it's not like you're giving it to them and forcing them to do it. So they're going to take ownership of it, and it will be easier for you to trust them to make sure that it's accomplished. And bonus, if possible, once they do volunteer, my dog is barking, sorry. Once they do volunteer to take that task on, ask them, how can I support you? When do you want to follow through to meet up about this? That way they know that, you're still there for them to check in, to support them throughout the journey as they need it. Okay? What else, Fergus? What did we miss?
No, we're good.
We're cool. And on that, I feel like let's call it a day. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode of Executives Uncut. I hope you found these materials valuable. And if you enjoyed the content, share it, subscribe it with your friends, with anyone who may benefit from this. Don't forget to visit hodgescoaching.com for new episodes. You can also follow us on social media at Hodges Coaching, or just look in pretty much any podcast, place, Amazon Music, Apple, to, find us. Just search for Executives Uncut. All right. We hope to see you and hope you listen to more episodes. I'm Sarah Hodges, and I'll see you next week.